After studying this module, you shall be able to know how culture affects communication, learn the type of communication, understand the concept of verbal and non-verbal communication, learn the use of verbal in cross-cultural context. Communication is most essential attribute that helps in survival of an individual in the society. Aristotle said, "Human being is a social animal." I extend his idea by proposing that the communication is the medium by which we are maintaining our identity as a social animal. Having said that, looking into our past, the human being had been communicating about themselves, their thoughts, feelings, intentions, information through the signs and the symbols. There are many forms of communication through which two or more people, groups and culture can communicate between each other. However, it is a major challenge to get involved in intercultural communication than to intracultural communication. Since people belong to different cultural backgrounds in two cultures, therefore, it is challenging to interpret others' speech in cross-cultural contexts. The participants have a tendency to add their own conventions and expectations from their cultural background. It can become a serious issue when two speakers acquire widely different communication convention. The probability of misrepresentation of whole agenda can even lead to breakdown of relationship between the two cultures. By Richards in 1985. To be able to communicate effectively across cultures, we need to understand that people may view new cultures through their culturally biased lenses, and that words and gestures may carry different meanings and connotations between different cultures. Hence, it is of utmost importance to understand other person, the cultural context in which they are operating in, and how other person might respond within the context. It is therefore important to understand the various types of communication in the cross-cultural context. It is significant to know that verbal and non-verbal communication does vary, and that the interpretation of non-verbal cues that seems obvious to us may not be accurate. This unit will help us to be more effective in communicating cross-culturally in today's global environment. Verbal communication. What is verbal communication? Verbal communication is the most common type of communication. Within verbal communication, participants make use of words that may be shared in forms of discussion, dialogues, presentation, arguments, and so on. The attempt of the sender is to inform and share his or her own ideas, thoughts, intentions, and feelings to the receiver. Apart from the verbal speech, the intonation, the pitch, and even the quality of words makes a whole lot of difference in the interpretation of the words. For example, "Please shut the door," spoken politely, is looked as a request to the receiver. The same information spoken harshly or loudly may be seen as command, or may convey the feeling of anger within the receiver. To make one clear, the speaker must make an effort to be loud and clear while sharing his content to the forum. The quality of words takes an utmost importance in this case. At the same time, the receiver holds responsibility of checking whether his information is correct or not. Although difficulties with verbal communication can be completely avoided, it is possible to increase the chances of communicating successfully by considering the message the sender wishes to communicate before speaking and communicating with respect to the recipient's point of view. Verbal communication is of two types: oral communication and written communication. Oral communication. Oral communication is the first type of verbal communication. Within oral communication, the individual uses speech to convey his needs, ideas, intention, and thoughts. The speech is the first and foremost form of verbal communication that an individual acquires during his childhood. Let us understand the structure of speech. The structure of speech. The speech is the basic unit of language that facilitates oral communication across all cultures. Therefore, it is essential to understand the specificity and universal structures of speech that exist within all cultures. The 6 basic elements of any speech observed across cultures includes phonetics, phonome, morpheme, syntax, semantics and pragmatics. Phonetics is the first structure of speech that exists universally across cultures. Even Chomsky in 1960 had shared that each individual have a language acquisition device, LAD, in his or her mind, where all sound systems are pre-existing and wired in the brain. The 3 basic forms of sounds observed universally across all languages includes crying, cooing and vocalizations. These forms of sound system in speech are recognized as phonetic, concept of ethic in module 7. Few of the existing sound systems are retained in language through babbling. In the process, the children acquire specific sound systems from their mother or significant others around his or her immediate environment. The universal form of sound system funnels down to the specific sounds in a culture. There is a process of synaptic proving results in tracing of the effect of sounds that are not heard by a child in its immediate environment. The structure of sound system specific to one culture is known as phonemic. Concept of emic in module 7. For instance, Japanese use L for the sound R and L. R sound is not existing in the language. The third structure in speech includes morpheme. Morpheme is the basic unit of words. Further, these chain of words are joined together to form a sentence. Within the sentences, the fourth structure of oral speech emerges, known as the syntax of the sentence. The basic structure of all the sentences in language is observed in terms of syntax of the language. For example, in Indian language, the syntax is generally followed in terms of the subject, object, verb. For example, Ram khana kha raha hai. In this, Ram is the subject followed by khana, the object, and khata hai is the verb. In English language, the syntax is generally followed in terms of subject, verb, object. For instance, Ram is eating the food. Ram is the subject, eating is verb, and the food is object that is eaten. The next structure of speech is recognized in form of semantics. Semantic means the meaning of sentence. The meaning of the sentence is the most important. Thus, we can say we usually comprehend the meaning of the sentence. The last and most important aspect of verbal speech is represented through pragmatics. Pragmatics is the appropriateness of the goodness of speech. It is the most complex and significant aspect of oral communication in the cross-cultural context. If the oral communication is not done on the right time and in the right manner, then the meaning of the sentence can change in the front of the receiver. This may have negative implications to the relationship of the sender and the receiver. The other nonverbal aspect of oral speech includes quality of the speech. The quality of the speech is explained in terms of the frequency with which the speakers talk, fast or slow, the amplitude of the speech, loud or soft, and the intonations of the speech, that includes the variation of the speech. Thus, oral communication is influenced by pitch, volume, speed, and the clarity of speaking. It includes spoken word, either face-to-face or through phone, voice chat, video conferencing on any other medium. Following the verbal, non-verbal aspects of speech, few characteristics of oral communication includes as follows. Characteristics of oral communication. The effectiveness of oral communication will largely depend on the way it is composed, received and interpreted by the mind of the receiver. The value that information holds for the receiver will affect the quality of oral communication. On part of the sender, the competence of the sender will impact the pragmatics of oral communication. The attributes like presentation skills, delivery skills, composition skills and critical judgment skills of the sender will decide the level of competence the sender has. Within oral communication, the production of speech will be dependent on the systematic working of the mouth. For example, through lips, one produces bilabial sounds, through teeth produce dental sounds, and fricative sounds, glottal sounds that are produced from the throat of the organism, and so on. The information is expressed in the form of art, visual presentations, etc. There are various channels in which communication takes place. spoken word either face to face or through phone, voice chat, video conferencing or any other medium. The inherent merits and demerits of oral communication are described here. Merits: it is spontaneous and natural. It is therefore easy for others to understand. The choice of words generally suits the listener. It is supported by non-verbal communication. The communicator or the person who communicates is always physically available. It can help in developing relations. Demerits: words spoken disappear into thin air. The words are temporary. Words are not permanent, unlike, say, in written communication. What is heard is often forgotten. Non-verbal communication, that communication understood by people, supports oral communication by other cultures. Written communication. Written language is developed much later in man's early history. The earliest script is supposed to be found in China. Until paper was invented by the Chinese and later in Egypt, there was no written communication except on leather scrolls and palm leaves. In comparison to oral communication, written communication is much more restricted and inaccessible to the people. Though written communication follows the similar characteristic of speech as in oral communication. The written language requires alphabets, scripts, grammar of the language. These alphabets, scripts, are known as grapheme. The grapheme is the smallest unit used in describing the writing system of any given language. The grapheme word has been derived from the phoneme. It is the sounds produced by the alphabets, like alphabet U produce the sound of A in English language. Similarly, alphabet I produce the sound of E. Thus, it is challenging to learn the graphemes of few languages. Few languages like Asian languages show regularity and exhibit correspondence in phoneme-grapheme relationships. While in Western languages, especially in English, there is a lack of correspondence between grapheme to phoneme in the alphabets. Thus, writing the English language seemed to be more challenging than the Hindi. Writing is facilitated by the invention of paper and later invention of printing by John Gutenberg in the 15th century. These inventions made knowledge available to many more people. Various forms of written communication includes books, newspapers, magazines, e-newsletter, emails, WhatsApp, journals and so on. Thus, written communication is essential for communicating complicated information such as statistics or other data that could not be easily communicated through speech alone. Written communication also allows information to be recorded so that it can be referred to at a later date. Characteristics of written communication. Through written communication, one can convey information to more than one participant. This form of communication can convey a large number of ideas. These ideas and thoughts can be corrected, edited, can be rewritten again and again. Merit of written communication. It is more reliable than oral communication, as a written and signed document carries more weight and validity than spoken words. It strengthens and clarifies a verbal message. It can be easily duplicated and can reach a wide audience at once. It is suitable for communicating lengthy messages. It can be filed for future references and become an official and permanent record for any organization. Demerits. It takes time to get committed to writing and the feedback is much delayed. It lacks a personal touch and it is difficult to persuade the recipient. It is a hindrance rather than help to illiterate people. Poor writing skills can hamper the effectiveness of the written communication. Written communication are also not flexible. It is a very rigid means of communication. Future directions. Although language must have evolved in the setting of face-to-face communication, human inventiveness has long sought ways to transcend the limitations of time and space that physical co-presence imposes. The most important technological development in this quest was the invention of word-syllable systems of writing. Probably in Mesopotamia, around 4,000 years ago, phonogrammic representational system made it possible to transform the ephemera of speech into the tangible record that exists independent of the person who generated it. A development with profound consequences at both the individual and the societal level. Writing systems combined with more recently invented technologies for recording, transmitting and reproducing signals, make it possible to transmit a dizziness variety of materials, data, text, graphics, facsimile, to name only a few. Over virtually limitless distances, surely the enhanced communicative capacities that such technologies make possible have wide-ranging potential consequences for the way human life is constituted. A species' survival depends critically upon its ability to communicate effectively, and the quality of its social life is determined in large measure by how and what it can communicate. Human social life, as it is presently constituted, is predicated upon the extraordinary level of communicative virtuosity, a level of virtuosity that the unique human ability to use the language confers. Absent this, our lives would be quite different. Summary: there are many forms of communication through which two or more people, groups and cultures can communicate between each other. Verbal communication is the most common type of communication. Within verbal communication, participants make use of words that may be shared in the form of discussions, dialogues, presentation, arguments and so on. Oral communication is the first type of verbal communication. Within oral communication, the individual uses speech to convey his needs, ideas, intentions and thoughts. In comparison to oral communication, written communication is much more restricted and inaccessible to the people. Written communication is essential for communicating complicated information such as statistics or other data that could not be easily communicated through speech alone.